From a disappointing announcement trailer to multiple indefinite delays, and the eventual shift to a new studio, the Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time remake has definitely had a rough time these past few years, which is funny because, the whole thing is about time. So, what's going on? Why am I not jumping, slashing, and rewinding time right this second? Seriously, there hasn't been a real Prince of Persia game since 2010. Though an argument could be made for 2013's mobile game Prince of Persia: The Shadow and the Flame, and forget about the Prince of Persia VR escape room. Yes, an escape room Prince of Persia game. Well, Prince of Persia wasn't actually a dead franchise. Let's use our time powers to go back to the beginning, when a future seemed bright. When the original Sands of Time launched in 2003 for the PS2 and other 6th generation consoles, it was not just extremely popular, but pretty groundbreaking as well. The reimagining of Jordan Mechner's 1989 Apple II classic set the standard for graphics at the time, and it also achieved some pretty impressive technical feats like convincing real-time cloth physics, advanced lighting techniques, and super smooth movement that harkened back to the original game's rotoscoped visuals. Combine that with cinematic parkour platforming, acrobatic combat, genuinely likable characters, and the awesome time-shifting dagger at the center of the story, and you had the beginning of a very promising franchise. That promise was delivered on over the course of the next several years. In 2004, we got a darker, grittier, more mature take on the prince in Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, and then again in the epic conclusion of the trilogy with 2005's Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones. After 3 successful games in 3 years, the prince's story had apparently wrapped up, but we hadn't seen the last of Prince of Persia. A smaller turn-based tactics spin-off and a full remake of the original 1989 game in the style of The Sands of Time followed. But then something else came along in 2007, something that marked the beginning of the end for Prince of Persia. It was a little game you might have heard of: Assassin's Creed. If you're even a little familiar with Prince of Persia, you might have noticed that it bears a striking resemblance to the early Assassin's Creed games. The parkour, the almost rhythmic combat, the settings, they all look kind of familiar, don't they? Well, that's because that first Assassin's Creed game began its development as a next-gen Prince of Persia sequel titled Prince of Persia: Assassins, before spinning off into its own franchise. So we wouldn't even have Altair, Ezio, Connor, or any of the other assassins if the prince hadn't carved the path for them. While Assassin's Creed was just getting started, we got something wonderful that unfortunately went underappreciated: 2008's Prince of Persia reboot. That game made big changes to staple features of the franchise that people were unfortunately not ready for, and not even its gorgeous, painterly visuals or vibrant world could save it from poor sales. I guess people don't like these cinematic one-on-one battles, but I thought they were pretty cool. The general consensus among fans of Prince of Persia 2008 was that the central character wasn't the prince they had come to know and love over the course of the Sands of Time trilogy. So Ubisoft abandoned that universe and returned to the Sands of Time universe with 2010's Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands. That game brought the prince to next gen with realistic graphics and took place in the 7-year gap between the Sands of Time and Warrior Within. What also made The Forgotten Sands interesting is that there were 6 different versions of the same game that were developed by different studios from Ubisoft. Each one told roughly the same story, but presented it differently and featured very different gameplay. Each version of the game was launched in 2010 to coincide with the Prince of Persia movie, which starred Jake Gyllenhaal as the prince, who was finally given a name in the films: Dastan. I think it's Dastan? Was it Dastan? Doston? That's how forgettable it was. I can't even tell you the name of the main character. After the misstep of Prince of Persia 2008, 2010 seemed like the year that would be the Prince of Persia year, getting it back on top. A big Hollywood film created by the same team that brought us Pirates of the Caribbean and led by a cast of notable actors, and a video game tie-in that brought back the prince from the Sands of Time universe, which was set in the same continuity. All the stars were aligning, but alas, it fell apart. Prince of Persia was being positioned as Disney's next big film franchise, but as you can tell, there's not a Prince of Persia ride at Disney World, so disappointing box office returns, poor reviews, and the general loss of interest in the game series shut down any hope of that. And The Forgotten Sands, while being favorably reviewed for at least a few of its many iterations, also failed to meet expectations in terms of sales. Unfortunately also, the Assassin's Creed franchise was proving to be much more successful. The Prince of Persia was being left behind, buried by the very sands it once wielded with such confidence. But now, it's 2023, almost 2 decades since the Sands of Time's original release, and the years-long drought that Prince of Persia fans have faced seem like it might be coming to an end, an oasis in the distance, or at least it looked that way for a while. But a mirage it seemed to be. In September of 2020, in a Ubisoft forward broadcast, the Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time remake was announced and shown in a brief gameplay trailer. Some fans already had an inkling of the game's existence due to leaks in the months leading up to it, which were then followed by the Russian Uplay store letting the cat out of the bag right before the presentation. But none of this ultimately mattered because, well, the game looked a little rough. Instead of the grand return of one of Ubisoft's pillar franchises, what we saw was a pretty graphically lackluster interpretation of the original game's characters and world. Although at least it seemed the gameplay would largely remain intact, but just look at that face. Why? Fans immediately called the trailer's visuals out, especially since it was reported that the game was running on the latest iteration of Ubisoft's Anvil engine, the very same one used for Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Rainbow Six Extraction. What do these games have in common? They both look fantastic. What does this have? Nothing. Ubisoft responded by saying that the visuals were a deliberate design choice, intended to make the game stand out from its contemporaries and amplify its fantasy elements, in the same way that the original game's lighting systems gave it an ethereal feel. Clearly, they missed the mark, and with just 4 months to go before the game's announced January 21st, 2021 release date, things didn't look too good for the Prince. In December, 3 months after the trailer dropped and the backlash ensued, Ubisoft announced that the remake had been delayed from its encroaching January slot to a few months later in March. The delay was blamed on the pandemic, but it would still give Ubisoft Mumbai and Ubisoft Pune extra time to polish and improve their project before it hit the market. That's good, right? A little extra time could only be beneficial, it always has been. And Prince of Persia deserves all the development time it needs to recapture the magic the original had in 2003, getting lightning in that bottle once again. And it wasn't even the only Ubisoft game facing delays. Rainbow Six Quarantine, now known as Rainbow Six Extraction for obvious reasons, Far Cry 6, and Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora had all just received delays of their own. Several months pass, and it's now February 2021. Just about a month out from release, the developers announced that the Sands of Time remake has yet again been delayed, but left out a crucial piece of information. One I would say is probably the most important part of an announcement: any release date. See, this, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call an indefinite delay. Regarding the project, Ubisoft Pune stated that the delay was intended to allow them to, quote, deliver a remake that feels fresh while remaining faithful to the original, end quote. Which is what you want to hear from a development studio in charge of an important remake. Thank goodness Ubisoft Mumbai and Ubisoft Pune were so dedicated to deliver a fantastic, faithful product. And what a shame it was that they were kicked off of the project they had put so much effort into. As far as we know, the two Indian branches of Ubisoft continued to work on the Sands of Time remake up until May 2022. That was when it was announced that Ubisoft Montreal, the premier studio responsible for launching Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, Far Cry, and yes, even the original Prince of Persia series, had taken over development of the project. The reasons behind the move had not been officially made clear, but the news did break after a year of near radio silence outside of another delay in October 2021. It didn't even make an appearance at Ubisoft's E3 presentation that year, which is not a good sign. After the change in development studio, Ubisoft erased the project's 2022 to 2023 release date along with its presence at retailers, delisting pre-orders in June 2022, and this meant the state of the project was now even more mysterious, and you couldn't even pre-order if you wanted to. As for those who already held pre-orders, Ubisoft suggested they either cancel them or sit tight for new information as development progresses, and I'm sure GameStop employees loved that. Despite several years of development already completed and Ubisoft Montreal reportedly making use or learning from the previous developers' work, there's still no end in sight for the Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time remake. Ubisoft, possibly as a means of redirecting constant questions from excited or worried fans, even created an FAQ page exclusively for the still in development project in November 2022. The page only consisted of a few lines, but it does reassure fans that the project has not been cancelled, and there are no other other Prince of Persia remake projects in the works, and that pre-orders will be available when a new release date is given. Additionally, all of the pre-orders that had been placed up to that point have been cancelled and refunded anywhere that was possible. And that brings us to 2023. We're a few months into the latest indefinite delay, and there has been absolute silence since that November 2022 update. Now, friends, it's time for the part of the video where I, your good friend Kino, put my computer brain to good use and try to figure out why all this is happening. First, let's take a look at Ubisoft as a company. It's no secret that they've been having some financial troubles, suffering losses, and have been delaying projects left and right, and just recently went on a cancellation spree, shutting down 7 projects in as many months. This situation has led Ubisoft to narrow their focus and development resources on bigger games and live service titles like Defiant, which leverages their biggest franchises to create a competitive FPS that looks like it will take on Call of Duty. While Prince of Persia was once a cornerstone of their business, it's unlikely that the Sands of Time remake will make them the dump trucks full of money that they need right now, like a live service game can. So there it sits on the back burner. Not entirely cancelled, but far from a priority. What about the original developers, Ubisoft Mumbai and Pune? Ubisoft Pune was established in 2008, but had largely been responsible for providing assistance to the other studios, such as creating digital assets and the like. The games they are solely credited with creating is Prince of Persia, The Shadow and the Flame, the mobile game, and Assassin's Creed Rearmed from 2011, a top-down multiplayer game exclusive on iOS. Ubisoft Mumbai, on the other hand, is almost completely brand new. It was founded in 2018 and seems to have only provided assistance for Just Dance 2023 and a dodgeball party game called Oddballers, which also came out at the beginning of this year. The changing of development studios was particularly unfortunate for Ubisoft Mumbai, since it was reportedly established specifically to help Ubisoft Pune develop the Sands of Time remake. While it's clear that these two studios do have quite a bit of talent, it appears that they just were not ready to helm a AAA project built from the ground up just yet. Or were they? I mentioned that the Sands of Time remake was being built on the latest iteration of Ubisoft's Anvil engine, an engine designed for sprawling, open-world games. While Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is definitely not that, and trying to force an engine to do things it was never designed to do would be difficult for even the best development houses, let alone ones with minimal experience. In a report for The Gamer, Vaspan Dastur spoke with an anonymous source close to the project who said that wall running, one of the most basic and core features of the Sands of Time, was not possible on Anvil, which was a problem that took time to be solved. Additionally, the Indian studios had to build game assets and animations from scratch, which took even more time and resulted in the strange appearance and jankiness that disappointed fans in the announcement trailer. And now the project lies squarely in the hands of Ubisoft Montreal. That's probably comforting to most fans and bodes well for the game's eventual release, especially since this isn't that studio's first rodeo with this kind of situation. With summer coming up, Summer Games Fest seems like a great time and place to re-reveal a new and improved Sands of Time remake, along with a solid, hopefully set in stone, release date. But who knows, time is really finicky with this series and all that jazz. All I know is I can't wait to do flippy slashes and rewind time only to completely beef it on a similar platforming section. Well, who knows when that'll get to happen, but thanks for watching.